I wish I knew this when I was starting carnivore. Hey, what's shaking bacon? My name is Bruno Panucci. I hope you're doing well. So I started carnivore way back in 2018, but I wasn't consistent with it. Not for a few years. I didn't become consistent till January 2021. And at that point, not a lick, taste, or bite of anything off a carnivore diet. I lost 165 pounds. I'm at a weight stall. I still have high fasting insulin, blood sugar perfect, A1C perfect. I initially turned to carnivore because I have heart disease. I had a heart attack back in 2015. It's helped manage the majority of my health issues, but my fasting insulin is still an issue. Now, there's plenty of ways to manage blood sugar and insulin issues. One of the ways is fasting. Now, I'm not a big fan of fasting, but I am a big fan of fasting. But let me explain myself. So when it comes to getting on board with carnivore and cutting out carbohydrates, it's a difficult road for most people. Most people have an addiction to carbohydrates. And along with that addiction comes food cravings. How many people have you met when you're talking about a low carb or carnivore diet or even a ketogenic diet and they say, I can never give up my bread or I could never give up my pasta? They're basically admitting they're fine with their addiction. Now, if they're in relatively good health and they don't have any issues, I'm not just talking about obesity, but any health issues, then all the more power to them. It's working fine for them. But for those people who are trying to manage whatever health problem with carnivore, or whether it's a weight issue, which is also another health problem, then you have to stop and accept the fact that maybe you're an abstainer, not a moderator when it comes to carbohydrates. And when it comes to fasting, it's too much to handle all at once. It's tough enough breaking up with carbohydrates in the beginning when you're starting carnivore. I would say easily in the first 6 months. It's different for everyone. Some people can do it in 3 months. Some people can take 6 months or longer before they can get over the cravings. And I mean not just the cravings, but the habit. And I'll get into that in a bit. But right now, when it comes to just initially breaking up with the cravings, it can take a few weeks just for the cravings to go away. The average person, maybe a couple weeks. And that's with a physical withdrawal you're going to deal with. That's like headache, your energy's going to be off, your body's going to drop a bunch of fluid because you're giving up carbohydrates. So your cells are literally dropping fluid. And that's when people get diarrhea. They pee a lot at night. Initially, I just had to deal with diarrhea and peeing a lot at night for the first few days. And then the diarrhea would go away. Not a big issue, right? So it's easy to manage that part of it for the first few weeks, especially if you're taking electrolyte supplements. I personally don't recommend taking more than you need. I recommend snake juice for those of you who are trying to manage your energy levels when you're giving up carbohydrates, because it can zap you. It really can. I remember the first week I ever gave up carbohydrates and I was a mess by the end of the week. Started on a Monday. By the time I got to a Friday, it was tough. I was weak. I was exhausted. I also wasn't eating enough. Fasting's an okay thing to do when you've been doing carnivore for quite a while. When you have no cravings, even when you're hungry, you don't have cravings for foods that are off a carnivore diet, and maybe I would still give it another month or two, then I would consider looking into doing fasting. But when you're doing zero carb and fasting and you're starting both at once, it's not good, because what happens is you might get benefits from fasting, absolutely, but you may always be thinking about the food that you can't eat, the carbohydrate foods, and they're going to be calling to you even more. And I highly recommend not doing both at once. Just stick to carnivore in the beginning. I'm talking at least the first 6 months. Make sure you're feeling good with carnivore, because as soon as you start to get hungry in those first few months and you still have that sugar craving, maybe it's not screaming at you, but it's a little whisper in the back of your brain, as Kelly Hogan calls it, the lizard brain. And it's just whispering to you, and it gets louder and louder the hungrier you get. And you start doing fasts where you're just skipping breakfast, or maybe you're going a whole day without food, or maybe 2 days, 3 days, however long it is that you're doing your fasts for. It just makes you more susceptible to giving in to the carbohydrates when they're around. It's going to be a wrong place and a wrong time. You might be doing well with it for a little while, and then you're going to break. And I want to minimize that risk for you. Some people can manage that. That's great. I think the vast majority can't. And because the vast majority have a carbohydrate addiction. And that's where you have to just be self-aware and think, you know what, maybe both at once isn't a good idea. Calorically restricting yourself in the beginning when your body is trying to heal isn't maybe the best idea. Get carnivore under your belt first. Then once you're really good and you're not dealing with carbohydrate addiction and you're not listening to any voice in the back of your head, no matter how hungry you get, you're never thinking about, that pizza over there looks good, because maybe you haven't eaten all day. That can happen on its own when you're doing a carnivore diet. You can go long hours of windows without eating. That's fine. You're trying to get more in tune with your hunger signals. But especially if you're getting red meat in there, because when you're eating red meat and you're getting enough fat in there, it's easy to not be susceptible to cravings. It's really nice. You're not limited and controlled by the food around you and being at the wrong place at the wrong time and just being hungry enough that you go, you know what, like I just got to have something. Maybe it's an alcoholic beverage, maybe it's food. It doesn't matter if it's off the carnivore diet. I've been doing it long enough. I get benefits from fasting, but it doesn't agree with my thyroid. It stresses out your adrenal gland. Fasting can be beneficial for people. I'm one of those people, if I keep my electrolytes up when I'm fasting with snake juice, I do really well fasting. My energy is really well. If I do it without snake juice, even though I feel great through the day on a water fast, I really feel rough at night and I start getting like 5-6 hours sleep at night. It doesn't agree with my body. If I keep my electrolytes up, not an issue. I just feel that good when I fast with electrolytes. That's something I've learned over the years. But when I do water fasts, I've done short-term fasts, long-term fasts. I've done a lot of fasts. Overall, it's not the best for me. I feel great when I do it, but it doesn't agree with me. And you have to be able to recognize the difference between feeling good and it doesn't agree with me. Well, how can you have both at once? If you feel good, how could it not agree with you? Because the pros are outweighed by the cons for me. I don't think it's healthy to get by on 4 or 5 hours sleep a night. I don't think it's really good for you. I got to the point once when I was really limiting my calories and only eating in certain windows and not getting enough fat or carbs in my diet when I first went zero carb. And I actually got sleep paralysis. I'm going to talk about that in a future video. Sleep paralysis I found very intriguing, but it freaks most people out. Don't do too much at once. You don't need to climb Mount Everest in one day. You don't need to do it in a week. You don't even need to climb Mount Everest. Lots of small hills will get you there. Conquer the first one. Focus just on strict carnivore. Lots of people want to be strict. That's enough of a challenge for most people. That right there. Some people are only 90% strict, 95% strict. Oh, they have a drink every now and then, or they put ketchup on their food, or they just have some sauce, or having foods with breadcrumbs, whatever it is. If you're trying to be strict and you're keeping just enough carbs in there, it's going to make it challenging for you. And you're definitely not going to handle fasting well. Now, that's if you have a sugar addiction. If you don't have a sugar and carbohydrate addiction, and I have close friends who are carnivore and they just don't deal with that. It's not an issue for them. 95% or 98% is good enough for them. And they don't have the, I fell off the bandwagon attitude or oh, I've really screwed up and now what do I do? They can handle carnivore just fine doing it at that pace because they don't deal with those cravings. But the vast majority of people out there seem to deal with the cravings, at least the people I interact with, the people in these carnivore groups on Facebook. And be aware and say, you know what? How well is it working for me when I'm doing both at once? Eventually, once you're old hat at something, it's easy to handle more. It's easy to handle something new. It's okay. You can't go out and bench press 300 pounds all at once. It took me a few years to get up to 300 pounds with a bench press. And when I finally got there, I was like, this is a great place to be. I didn't do that overnight. And once you get good at it, you can start doing different things with your bench press. You can try different techniques. And sometimes it can help, sometimes it can hurt you. But the important thing is you've gotten to that hill and then you can start playing around with it. Get comfortable with where you are first. I wish I knew that in the beginning. It would have made becoming carnivore drastically easier if I wasn't trying to do fasting along with carnivore in the beginning. It took me a few years to learn. Don't do that. It just doesn't agree with you. If you're one of those people that can identify with that, then it's something you have to really stop and reassess. What if I try carnivore without the fasting? Give it 6 months, just 6 months of strict carnivore. That's it. And then after that, you'll find it'll be a breeze to do fasting, especially if your last meal was red meat. Fasting is difficult if you're not getting enough fat in your diet. If you're having a high fat day, just having red meat, not even adding extra fat, and then having a really lean day or just fasting, I think that becomes easier. And I just learned for myself, you got to keep your nutrients up. Your body's running on fuel. And if you cut that fuel out, and the goal is to lower insulin and blood sugar, but at the expense of what? What else is it doing to your body? If it's not straining your adrenal gland, well, then no problem, go for it. But the vast majority of people, yeah, it is straining your adrenal gland, and it's causing more issues with weight loss. So just be aware, give it a shot. If you're struggling becoming a consistent carnivore, that could be one of the reasons why. Stay full on what you can eat. Try and keep it red meat. Take care.